Good afternoon, everyone, and sorry for the late start. I want to thank you all for coming today, and also thank the EMK Center for hosting today's press conference. And I'd also like to thank Ambassador Bernicat for agreeing to do this press conference today, just a few days before she departs back to Washington. With that, I will turn it over to Ambassador Bernicat for her opening remarks.
Assalamu alaikum. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming, and my apologies for the delays. I have to tell you that every farewell meeting I've had today has lasted longer than I anticipated. So the delay was for, I think, a good reason. So I appreciate your patience. And Nick, let me thank you, and let me thank Naveed and the EMK Center and all the staff here. I've had really wonderful memories of programs that we've done here at the EMK Center. It is a living memory of Senator Kennedy and all that he did for supporting Bangladesh during its war of liberation. And so we're really pleased to have this premier center, this premier space available for all kinds of great creative activities. Let me make a few opening comments before your questions. There comes a time when every diplomat has to leave. We know when we arrive, generally speaking, how long our tour of duty is going to be. So I can tell you I've been dreading this day for a long time. Later this week, after nearly almost 4 years in Bangladesh, I will depart for Washington. By the way, this has been the longest I've ever served a tour in my 37-year career so far. So I'm thrilled that I've been able to squeeze every extra minute out of my time here. I'm departing with a great sense of satisfaction, not merely personal, but most importantly and mostly for what the team at the U.S. Embassy and our EMK and other centers have been able to achieve to advance peace, development, and democracy, to promote prosperity and human dignity. And of course, we haven't done it alone. We've worked with such amazing partners, including many of you here in the room today. The United States, I'm fond of saying this, the United States and Bangladesh were both founded on democratic principles after struggles for independence, and we share a long history of cooperation. We welcome and support Bangladesh's vision as a tolerant, democratic country that serves as a bridge for commerce and an anchor for stability and prosperity, not just here in the region, but around the world. I like to refer to the fact that Bangladesh actually exports peace. The United States and Bangladesh cooperate closely on security issues, ranging from counterterrorism to peacekeeping, and we've been particularly challenged in the counterterrorism arena during my time here. And I'm happy to say that we have enhanced that partnership, and that enhanced partnership has helped keep both of our citizens safer. I'm also proud to have been here when it was announced earlier this year that Bangladesh had met all 3 criteria required for graduation from least developed country status by 2024. It is a great accomplishment and for the country, but also for every Bangladeshi, and it underlines just how far Bangladesh has come in a very short period of time. As every official does, I also want to express once again the United States government's and the United States gratitude to both the government and the people of Bangladesh for your generosity in supporting the Rohingya refugees who are here. And we appreciate your continued efforts to ensure that nearly 1 million people, actually a little over 1 million people, receive the assistance that they need. We welcome the cooperation between Burma and Bangladesh on negotiating arrangements for repatriation of the hundreds of thousands of Rohingya here. We encourage both governments to continue working together and with the UNHCR and other relevant international organizations to ensure that all who return are doing so because they are volunteering to go, and to ensure that when they return to Burma, they will return to safe environments, to their places of origin, and with the ability to conduct their livelihoods. The returnees must not be confined to camps. They should instead be allowed to return to their own place of origin, and again, to have no restrictions on their movements, as we hear is currently the case. I'm very proud that the United States has provided both material and political support to Bangladesh in this effort. We have provided more than $345 million to assist the Rohingya themselves and the host communities in Cox's Bazar who are supporting them since the start of the current crisis last August. In addition to humanitarian funding, the U.S. government through USAID is also providing more than $200 million in annual development assistance to Bangladesh. And in Cox's Bazar, that translates to improving livelihoods, especially in those communities that are hosting the Rohingya, but also to improve health, education, and to ensure human rights, and to fight human trafficking. Bangladesh is strategically located at the crossroads between South and Southeast Asia, and that means that you are playing, and you're poised to play, an even greater role in the bridging of these two major regions, which account for the majority of the world's population and the majority of the world's economic activity. The U.S. hopes to play a supporting role through the Indo-Pacific strategy, which I understand is already being referred to as IPS. And we share your goal of building a more prosperous, secure, rules-based, and interconnected Indo-Pacific. The more you trade with your near partners, the greater your prosperity will be. With a dynamic and fast-growing economy, speaking of economies, Bangladesh's future success will be fueled by a strengthening of its democratic institutions and governing structures. This notion that somehow development should come ahead of democracy is a false choice. The two mutually reinforce one another. And Bangladesh has, from the beginning, committed to being a democracy. There's no reason to set that goal aside now. We're all anxiously awaiting, I know, the Bangladesh Election Commission announcement of the timing of the upcoming elections. We look forward, the United States looks forward to the government of Bangladesh fulfilling its commitment and the statements it has made to hold free, fair, credible, and participatory elections that, in the end, reflect the will of the Bangladeshi people. In order to do so, I've said this many times, parties must be free to participate in the political process. They have to be able to meet without intimidation. They have to be able to meet, period, and they have to be able to meet without fear that their members are going to be arrested at the scene. In addition, everyone in the political process, we urge, hold peaceful rallies and engage in peaceful practices without intimidation, reprisal, or arbitrary restrictions. In order to hold credible elections, there must be a credible opposition that is able to act as a political party and not be subject to intimidation or arbitrary arrest. As I've reiterated many times, the United States of America is not supporting any particular candidate or party or coalition. We are supporting the democratic process and the values that both Bangladeshi and American people hold dear. Freedom of expression is vital for a healthy democracy, particularly the ability for members of the media, civil society, organizations, and opposition political parties to express their views and advocate for policy change without fearing retribution. We also call on members of society to act peacefully and responsibly. We stress that all sides must eschew violence. Violence hinders the democratic process and only serves those who wish to undermine those democratic principles. So I leave here on Friday sad for everything that I'm going to greatly miss, including so many friends and colleagues from the media who are here today, and even those who aren't here today, who I've had the privilege to work with. I do want to leave you, though, with, I want to leave here with hope and bullish expectations for what this great country is capable of and what its wonderful people can accomplish. If your track record is any indication, there is so much more progress, many more achievements to come. Who would have guessed 47 years ago, after your devastating liberation war, that Bangladesh would have come so far so fast? And yet, your potential remains enormous and in many ways unfulfilled. I also leave here with heartfelt memories of so many occasions, big and small, involving many people or just one person, maybe even just a look from someone as I was passing on the street. It's a country, Bangladesh is, that I have come to love and I carry with me in my heart as I leave here. Your cultural diversity, your beauty, the strength and courage of your people are all extraordinary. And I promise you that I will tell that story wherever I go from now on. I never say goodbye because the chances of our meeting again are actually fairly big, in no small part because I fully intend to return here. But in the meantime, I'll say Abar Dakahobe. Oneg Donovan. And with that, I'd be happy to take your questions.
Okay, our first question will go to Rashid from Shomakal. Please wait for the microphone, Rashid.
Thank you. Excellency, firstly, we will miss you after your departing.
Thank you.
My question is that, what is your experience between joining and departing about Bangladesh and during the diplomatic relation and other aspects? Thank you.
I suspect the biggest difference is, while I didn't think it would be easy, I had no idea what the following three plus years would bring. And I leave here really humbled by the amount of complexity that there is here. For those of you who know my resume, you know I served in India, but you may not know that my responsibilities in India were in the political section. I followed domestic Indian politics for the northern half of the country, and a seemingly impossible task. And I thought I would never, ever work again in an environment that was that complex. I was really wrong. Bangladesh is a far more complex society, particularly your political history and the political nature of everything here. So, if I had to pick out one thing, that would be it.
The next question goes to Tawhidur Rahman from BanglaNews24.com.
Thank you, Your Excellency. I just want to know what is your great achievement, U.S.-Bangladesh relation in your period? Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I first of all, I never think of anything as my achievement. You get to work with a small portion of my team, But for those of you who have worked with other sections of the embassy, you know that there is this mighty force behind me. Sometimes I give them an idea and they help me realize it, but most of the time they're giving me ideas and we're figuring out how to achieve them. Sometimes we're taking your ideas and figuring out how to do that. And so nothing I've done has been my achievement. One of the, I guess though, the thing that I feel that the best about is that in the last 3.5+ years, and in spite of a number of contentious issues, that we still have a very open and positive partnership with the Bangladesh government. I have any number of interlocutors that I work with on a daily basis, but so do the members of my team, both Bangladeshi and American. I feel very strongly that we are living in a world today where people are finding it harder to talk to one another. We see countries becoming polarized. Certainly my own country is experiencing that. For all the benefits that social media bring in connecting us, I think it also separates us in some ways, and algorithms that keep feeding us news feeds and opinions that match the ones we've already looked at can leave us isolated in terms of understanding a broader range of viewpoints. Whenever I speak to young people, I urge them to seek out conversations with people they disagree with. Why? It shouldn't be to change someone's mind, though if you can, that's great, right? We all believe what we think is right and what the other person thinks is not so right. But the real point of having those conversations is to understand why the other person thinks differently. And then even if you don't come to the conclusion between the two of you that one of you is right and one of you is wrong, which is less likely to happen on average, if you walk away from that conversation having a better understanding of why the other person thinks the way they do, then that's a win. Because sooner or later, ideally, we're going to have to come together and figure out any issue or any differences that we have. And if we're not listening to one another, if we're not having those difficult conversations, we can't arrive at that compromise, at that resolution. So for me, the fact that we're all still talking, the doors are still open, hopefully more doors are open, that my that my successor will be able to walk into is perhaps the greatest thing that we've managed to do as a team over the last couple of years.
Next question goes to New Age, Shahidul Aslam Chowdhury.
I am infamous for not appreciating people. You look very beautiful today, in fact.
Thank you.
Keeping your
You're such
experience...
sweet mouth.
Keeping your experience in facing challenges in advancing Bangladesh-US relations, what obstacles do you see in advancing these relations in future, and how to overcome these obstacles?
This is going to sound like a horribly bureaucratic answer, but truly, it's a matter of how many hours there are in the day. I could work 24 hours a day and not finish everything I've wanted to do. You know, by the time you get to the end of an assignment, you think about all the things you haven't been able to do. The accomplishments are great, but I'm dogged by what I haven't been able to do. And the same is true. We recognize that the Americas desk isn't just there for the United States, though we act like it is just for the United States, but they're following relations with Canada and with Brazil and with all the countries who aren't even physically present here, but who have diplomatic relations with Bangladesh. So I think by far, in that expanding field of interest that we have, the most serious challenge is how do we keep prioritizing and how do we change those priorities and still manage to get a lot done. And that capacity, it's not just on the Americas side, it's also on the U.S. side. So I'm a big fan of anyone else who can do a task besides government doing it. So I love the fact that there are universities in Bangladesh and the United States that have set up teaching fellowships between themselves, that have faculty exchanges. You know, NIC staff doesn't need to be doing that if they can figure it out on their own. In the private sector, for every company that can come here and sell products or invest here without the U.S. Embassy having to get involved, so much the better, which is why we'd love to see, one of the reasons we'd love to see a one-stop shop here for foreign investors. We don't mind getting involved, but the more things work naturally, people to people, the more can happen. If you have to rely on the governments to do it, then chances are it'll take a little bit longer. Hopefully we can jumpstart things and then they can get going. But seriously, that's been the single greatest challenge.
Our next question goes to Jamuna TV. Mishu?
Ambassador, basic question is, you are from the very beginning, you are a very good advocate of political dialogue, and finally it happens on 1st November, you know. But that dialogue will happen between Dr. Kamal Hossain and Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina. They will lead the both team. But BNP chairperson, you know, she is in the jail. So what's your opinion regarding this dialogue, and do you have any suggestion for the politicians of Bangladesh?
Yeah. Well, I would say this, that dialogue, again, I'm a big fan of it, so it's a positive development. But I would urge you that, you know, to remember or to maybe focus on the fact that political parties involve everyone from the grassroots on up. And I've had the privilege of sitting with representatives of different parties in rural areas, in other cities, and even here in Dhaka, and watching them talk together, present their demands, many of which I was in a meeting of women politicians, and even though the Awami League politicians were sitting on one side of the room, literally, and the BNP on the other, what they were demanding of their party leaders and the election commissioner and me sounded exactly the same. You know, they all wanted more opportunities to participate. They wanted better symbols, not ones that were related to household items. It was remarkable. They wanted the chance to get candidacies, not just the seats that are reserved for women. So for me, the dialogue isn't about simply the high-level dialogue, and I shouldn't use the word simply because that's an extraordinary achievement, but how do party members relate to one another and work together for your benefit at every level? And like I said, I've seen it happening out there, and it's really remarkable, and I hope there'll be more of it. Parties compete against one another during elections, so of course there will be a lot of competition back and forth, but the dialogue should not be dependent on any one leader or any one party.
The next question goes to Channel I. Panto?
Thank you. My name is Pantu Rahman. Can I sit in?
Sure, as you like.
Well, I'm just quoting from your opening statement back on 17 February 2015. Well, you told us that, let me take this opportunity to say very directly that the United States does not back any particular political force or party in Bangladesh. Our intention is to work with all Bangladeshis. That was your opening statement here in Bangladesh. I believe your position is still same, but my question is, don't you think few political groups or parties are using your good office for their own benefits? Thank you.
Very good question. Certainly people have tried over time. And our job here, not just the Americans, but all of the diplomats here, why do we have embassies overseas, right? One goal is to present our government's views to the country and the government of the country we live in. But the other is to try and understand what is going on, and then to sort through that and figure out what of the things that are going on are important to the U.S., right? So we meet with members of all parties. Otherwise, how do we figure out, who does what do different people represent, what is the nature of the leadership of the different parties? And when you have those meetings, people can, I always say to people, we can have a really frank conversation, and I've had this conversation with a number of you. We can have a really frank conversation off the record, or if you're going to quote me in the press, we can have a very constrained conversation. What would you prefer? It took a while, but most people, I think, came to, I'm not talking about members of the press now, but most of the, political party leaders and even, think tankers and others understood that if they ran to the press or if they made their own comments publicly, that our next conversation wasn't going to be as free and frank as it could be. You always run that risk. I try very hard to make sure that when I have opportunities like this, that I underline that. I know from our history, and I know because a number of the U.S. ambassadors who have served here were either my mentors, my bosses, or my friends. And I know there were periods in your history where people were gathered in my living room to work out political deals. I think that's a rotten idea. It may have worked for the time, or it may not have. I can't go back and correct history, but why do I get a say, If that's the only way parties can come together. When I first got here, there was a Hartal and blockade effort going on that had turned very violent. A number of people were dying. The group of ambassadors, many of us got together to try and broker a peace, if you will, between the two parties. But again, we've figured out, we the United States, in some cases and through very difficult lessons, that we can't want something more than the host country wants and the people want themselves. Do Bangladeshis prize their right to vote? Do they prize their right to free speech? If I can echo that voice, and some would call that interference, but I call it, representing values that we believe we have in common. And so if we can echo those values, that's, I think, of real use to everyone. But the days of brokering deals so one party can do this and another party can do that, I think that holds back democratic development. A democracy is as strong as its institutions, be it, the big three, executive, legislature, and judiciary, but also political parties and civil society and the press and media. And while we all share knowledge and benefits with one another, and we can all be subject to interference, especially through social media now. We've experienced that in the United States. But I think by and large, we want to be a part of the dialogue to the extent that it helps strengthen the whole process, not strengthens one party or another. If we get caught up in the spin, as they call it in the United States, and we're going to do our best to explain how that happened or to correct the record so that people know what we were actually doing.
Next question goes to Sergio from Reuters.
Despite your previous statement, now may I raise the issue of Digital Security Act, which has already been enacted, and also Broadcasting Act, which has been approved by the Cabinet. Ahead of the just election, only 2 months left, how do you justify these two laws? Do you think that it is justified, or what is your comment?
Right. Well, first of all, I don't, it's not my place to justify them. They are they're very strict laws that I think we all recognize harbor significant potential for abuse. A number of ambassadors and embassies have been lobbying the government for the last 2 years about this act. And like many of you, we were disappointed to see the act come out in the form it did. But ultimately, whether or not the act is abused rests in the hands of those who use it, the police, the courts, the government itself. And we have urged and will continue to urge that if you stifle a free press, or if a law is used, even especially inadvertently, to stifle free speech, that presents a dangerous scenario. What happens if people can't speak freely? Do you stop having that opinion, or do you find another way to express it? And what is that other way? The healthy way is to be able to make those criticisms in public. As a government official, I can tell you, it's really irritating when a negative story comes out about the State Department back home, but that gives me a really clear signal of how at least some people are thinking about the job we're doing. So what do I do with that information? I can ignore it, I can counter it, or I can change the way I behave so that that impression is corrected over time. I think what's really difficult for those of us in a democracy is, what is too much free speech? Or put another way, when does free speech spill over into dangerous speech? The United States defines free speech exceedingly broadly, more broad than almost any other country in the world. But for us, I can say anything I want about the president. Well, I can't, but I shouldn't, I should say. I have the right to, but you know, we can even say false things about our public leaders. But if I threaten the safety of that leader, or if I call on people directly to take up arms or to attack that individual, not verbally, by the way, but you know, physically, then I can be arrested, because that crosses our tolerance for free speech. That's not what we consider free speech to be about. But the criticism, I would argue, is an important outlet. Ideally, and again, those of us who work in government, work in the media, I think we have a special responsibility. If we resort to insults, that may be protected in our free speech, but does it advance the dialogue? Does it advance the cause that or does it advance the issue that we are trying to have an impact on? If we don't do our homework and we don't have our facts straight, and we lose the trust of our readership, or we lose the trust of our constituents if we're in government, then that is ultimately counterproductive. So I would say, while the Digital Act is what it is, there will be opportunities to change it in the future, and if there are abuses to it, then it's up to people to keep track of those abuses, challenge them in the courts, challenge them in the legislature, and change it. I'll give you one tiny example. We had a law back in the 70s that was, the nickname was no knock, and it meant that police could break down your door without a search warrant and come into your homes and look for whatever they wanted to. They could take you away. Does that sound familiar? That's part of the Digital Security Act, right? It was eventually struck down as unconstitutional, but it did pass our legislature, and it passed for what was considered a good reason at the time, all of the civil unrest we had going on in the 60s and 70s. So in a democracy, you'll find that waxing and waning of interest. But it's up to us as citizens to insist that these acts be used in a responsible way.
Next question goes to Manob Jomin Mizan.
Madam Ambassador, today is the hectic day for you because of you already met our Prime Minister, Foreign Minister, and State Minister for Foreign Affairs. I wish to know, do you have any update about the said experience? I mean, your the attack on your car. And second part of my query, are you happy with the government response? Thank you.
Thank you for that question. I think it's fair to say that an attack like that is exceedingly rare in most countries, and it was a shock. We have asked and continue to ask for a full investigation, and that those responsible for the attacks be held accountable for those attacks. So I'm still waiting. My government is still waiting for that report. The government has issued a formal public apology and a number of private apologies, for which, all of which I am grateful for. But again, the idea is, you know, how did that happen? How did it happen in front of uniformed policemen? And how to prevent it from happening again, not just to an ambassador, but to anyone. That should not ever be the case.
Our next question goes to sarabanga.net.
Thank you. Excellency, today's your opening remarks, you recall our liberation war. You know that at that time, Pakistan's genocide against Bangladesh in 1971. And at the time, U.S. State Department's secretary was Henry Kissinger. And Henry Kissinger was support Pakistan's for that act. Not only Bangladesh, including several states, Henry Kissinger's was doing like this act. And now, round up world and people, they're accusing Henry Kissinger for complicity in war and against human against accusing against war criminal. So on this regards, what's your opinion?
Well, let me just say this, that, you know, I was acutely aware of the Liberation War as an 18-year-old in the United States, starting college. And I remembered attending rallies, learning about the war, protesting the U.S. position about the war. And you talked about the State Department being for Pakistan, but I urge you to pay a visit to the Liberation War Museum and take a look at the blood telegram. It was one of a series of telegrams that our predecessor, Archer Blood, as the Consul General here, and his staff wrote back to Washington explaining what was going on during the war, urging that the U.S. government change policy, and opposing the policy. Now, Archer Blood and his staff didn't know, in fact, no one knew publicly, that Henry Kissinger and President Nixon were trying to open relations with China, and that Pakistan had become the preferred interlocutor, the trusted interlocutor between our two governments. Be that as it may, and that was the policy reason, that was part of the policy reason. There have been so many good books written about this now. There were a number of people who had no trust that Bangladesh could prevail in its war, and they were making a pragmatic geostrategic decision. Many of us, though, and I love the way your Foreign Minister Ali, who was in New York on assignment, who relinquished his role as a Pakistani diplomat and immediately declared himself a Bangladeshi diplomat, calls it the rest of the story. And I love that because the American public, many prominent Americans, most notably the man for whom this center is named, Edward Kennedy, actively opposed the government's policy, which is our right in a democratic nation. And Senator Kennedy was able to, very importantly, stop further arms sales to Pakistan during that time period. I think we have to embrace all of our history, not just the parts that are the most frequently told or the parts that make us most comfortable. And I'm exceedingly proud, and I think about this a lot. I have thought about this a lot as ambassador here, about the responsibility that my staff and I have to tell the truth, to see things as clearly as possible, and to represent opposing viewpoints back to Washington with our own analysis on where we think, the truth lies, or which account is more accurate, so that our policymakers in Washington can make the best decisions possible. We don't always have a policy years later that holds up very well, that appears to have been the right thing to do. We all act in the moment. Kissinger and Nixon, without offering justification, were acting in what they thought was the best interest of the United States at the time. But there were many Americans who felt our best interests were better upheld by supporting a people who were fighting for their democratic rights. And I'm really pleased that the majority of us were right.
Ma'am, can you take a couple more quick
Sure.
questions?
Sure.
Okay, so this one goes to Boishoki TV. Okay.
Your Excellency, this is Meher from Boishaki Television. I'm business reporter, so I will ask a business-related question. Firstly, we'll miss you, of course, for your work. And Your Excellency, after Rana Plaza, there's a lot of development has been occurred in RMG sector by your RMG entrepreneur and government, and by your coordination, brand and buyers. After that, in this development arena, if I give you the marks to how the RMC sector, how many development has been occurred within 100 marks? How many marks you will give in this development arena?
You want me to grade the RMG sector? Yeah. Gosh. Okay. So I'm going to give the RMG sector 2 grades. All right. On factory safety, I'm going to give it a 96. The amount of change that has occurred, the number of, again, we're only talking about exporting factories, unfortunately, but of the exporting factories, so many of those that were safe, or that were unsafe, and where either the owners or the building owners were unwilling to do the right thing, have shut down, is a good thing. Their business didn't go away. It shifted to those plant owners who were willing to do the right thing. And your business has grown steadily since Rana Plaza, not because people ignored the safety issues, but because your industry partnered uniquely in the world with buyers, with governments, with unions, all put in the resolve and the resources to help improve factory safety. You're almost there. I give you 96% because there are a number of factories under the Accord, the European manufacturers, they're largely remediated, but they have a much bigger percentage of the big things left to do, like install fire sprinkler systems, which may not sound like much, but when you have that many human beings in a building with flammable materials, sprinklers mean the difference between life and death. They're over your heads here somewhere, I think. No? It should be. So that's really important, but there's work that needs to be done, and the RCC, which has been the Remediation Coordination Cell, has been stood up. It's just starting to operate, to give it all the responsibility of finishing up those Accord plants, plus taking on all the national unity factories, we think is a horrible burden that the RCC shouldn't have to weather all by itself. So the donors who have been working on factory safety have been urging that the Accord be given a phased out approach so that they can help finish their work, so that Bangladesh can benefit fully from the resources that they and their buyers bring to the table. On the labor rights side, I'm afraid I have to give a much lower mark, and that is because your laws are not fully compatible with the ILO standards for labor rights, and these are standards that Bangladesh government has agreed to uphold. And in other cases, your law is very good on these labor rights practices, but the implementation of them is not. So if someone tries to organize a union and they get fired, they should get their job back and they should be able to finish their work. But they aren't. By and large, they're often fired and they're given compensation, but then people are left unrepresented who might otherwise be represented. I'm not saying that every plant has to have a union. I've been to many plants where there are worker welfare associations that are freely formed, or the members of which are freely chosen by the workers, and they become a very important tool for the owners to use to screen grievances, to pass information through, and ultimately to run more sustainable operations. So we look to see that those labor rights become more fully complied with, so that Bangladesh completes that report card as well. I would only say that, you know, the RMG sector is due for a change. I read up a lot on this because it's been such a big part of my tour here. But I especially you as a business reporter, I want to give you 3 things to contemplate. One is that as Bangladesh speeds towards middle income status, you're going to price yourself out of a portion of the market you've been dominating. What will you substitute that with? Will it be higher end garments? Will it be leather and shoes? Will it be light electronics? And I know there are people thinking about this, but my guess is that transition is going to come faster than many people are ready for. Secondly, Bangladesh helped make what's called the fast fashion industry. Your workers are so good. Price isn't the leading edge. I really dislike it when people say that, oh, you know, we have the cheapest labor, that's why we're the number 2 market. You have workers who produce high quality goods in a very fast manner. And the H&Ms and Zara's have really taken over the fashion industry. And for a generation, and they're called millennials, especially in Europe and the United States, being able to buy new, very inexpensive clothes every week has been a standard. Well, those millennials are older now, and they're working now, and now they're buying fewer fast fashion clothes. They're buying high-end suits and dresses, things that they can wear to their full-time, more professional jobs. Those, by and large, aren't being made in Bangladesh. So how will that shift? And the generation after them, and I always forget the name of the next generation, are not as numerous as the millennials. So who will buy those clothes in such large volume? It may be other markets in other countries, but if not, if you want to maintain your dominance in Europe and the United States, my guess is the mix of clothing is going to have to shift more to high end. And then finally, technology, which is the real threat to employment in many ways, is also chasing the industry. It won't be long, and I understand it's taking place in some places now, where if you go onto an online site to buy clothing, the time is coming where the order won't come from a warehouse to be shipped to your house. It'll come from the factory to be shipped to your house. Will the internet structure here, will the port and the airport and the price that it will take to get it from the website to your factory to my house in Virginia be sustainable? Or will a manufacturer in Ghana be able to do that, or in Haiti, or maybe in Mexico? So these are all the kinds of things that the industry here needs to be preparing for as it looks at issues of labor rights and labor safety. That was a really long answer to your question.
We're running a little over time, so I'll squeeze in one last question to Channel 24. Moshed?
You didn't think we'd forget you, did you, Marcia?
Thank you, Excellency. As you talked about the Indo-Pacific Economic Corridor, and on the other side we see One Belt, One Road. So my belief or my observation says we're going to be sandwiched in these two competition. You agree or disagree?
Yeah. Well, I disagree that they're a competition. Alice Wells, our acting assistant secretary, was here last week, and she gave the best explanation of the Indo-Pacific strategy that I've heard yet. And this is a strategy that is building, as we speak. And that is that it's either, I don't know if anyone was here and can remember, or was there and can remember, but she quoted it was either $72 trillion or $17 trillion worth of infrastructure is going to be required throughout the Indo-Pacific region in order to help build the economies of the region. That's way more money, either 17 or 72, than any one country can provide. And our goal is to make sure that everyone who participates, and China has clearly a key role to play, has to be able to do so in a way that is sustainable to the people of the region. Are you getting financing at a competitive rate, or does it threaten your very sovereignty? Is it sustainable? Is the country you're working with, or the companies you're working with, providing you with sustainable technology and a transfer of technology that you can apply here or anywhere in the corridor? What we'd like to see is a rules-based system that will benefit everyone and that we can all play in. And again, there's room enough for everybody in that field. The fact that this region trades the least with itself suggests that you've got a lot of potential right here at home that needs to be tapped into. The largest U.S. trade partners, Mexico and Canada. So our goal is to help provide resources, help inspire our private sectors to work together in ways that they might not be able to do separately, that can help advance either investing